Batra Daf Samar Bet Amud Aleph first line. We've been mentioning cases about you're selling a field without specifying certain things, or certain things were not mentioned in the sale. Now, what if Matzar lo Metzar Echad, Aruch Metzar Echad Katzer? So in my yeshiva days, whenever you see Rashi making diagrams, you knew you were in trouble. But it's really not so bad. I highly recommend using a Gemara because we're going to be referring to the pictures that Rashi draws, but it's really not so bad. At first, I panicked, but it's really not so bad. Okay. If somebody, when he drew the boundary around his field, he drew three complete lines around it, and the fourth line he only drew half. Amar Rav says, Lo kana ela keneged hakatzer. Since the fourth line, the fourth boundary, is not fully uh, created, therefore he only gets the half of the field which had the line created. Look at the first picture of Rashi. You'll see that the Rashi drew the line down the middle. The guy only acquires half the field because that's the only part that the fourth boundary was drawn. He did not mean to sell the other half. Okay. Why doesn't the guy acquire diagonal? Why are you cutting it in half? If the guy drew the line halfway, he should acquire it diagonally. I think it's called a hypotenuse. I remember my geometry. I probably feel my region though. So look at the second picture she drew. Rosh towards like a diagonal. You should have gotten that diagonal instead of going straight down. Shatigra Rav didn't answer him, seemingly admitting. However, Modera Rav would agree. However, if the field had Reuven and Shimon on one side, the third picture, and Yehuda and Levi on the other side. Right, you'll see Levi's name is missing because if he did not, if he should have written when he's writing the boundary, he should have written Reuven opposite of Levi, Shimon kineged Yehuda, Shimon opposite of Yehuda. He didn't write that. Since he didn't specify the fourth line over here, Rashid is using Levi as the one that was excluded. In that case, since he didn't mention Levi, that means he's trying to sell as much as he can next to Levi's side. And over there, Rav would definitely agree that you make the diagonal split. Okay. Next case. If someone wanted to sell a field that had a boundary with Reuven on the east and west side, and Shimon owned the field in the north and south, that is the fourth picture on the right side of Rashbam. Sorry, I've been saying Rashi, I meant Rashbam. He has to write If he wants to sell that field in completion, he has to mention, I am selling the field which is boundaring on two sides by Reuven, and Shimon boundaring on two sides. And if he does not write that, that means he's not selling the whole field, but rather be selling diagonal lines for basically 4/4 of that. For 4/8 basically, diagonally each one, like we mentioned earlier. Ibayo asked a question. Let's say he only mentioned the corners. He pointed to the four corners of the field. If you look at the picture with the X on it, Shimon Ruven Levi, he only mentioned that. He didn't mention the sides. Mahu, what's the halacha? Do you get the entire thing? Or maybe you only make the X, the diagonal from corner to corner would make an X. Maybe you only acquire that much. Kimin Ga'am. It's a certain type of Roman Greek alphabet. So what if he drew, instead of drawing, the next case is, let's say instead of drawing corners or drawing certain parts or right, left, up, down, what if he drew two corners? Mahu, what does he acquire that patch from one corner to the next? You'll see the case and then the question underneath it. You see the case in the bottom, the second to last picture on Rashbam, and underneath it you'll see the patch that the guy maybe would acquire. What would Rav hold? Next case, Amud Bet. Beserurim. Let's say the field was split up. Well, not split up. The outside of the field is owned by many other people. So look at the picture on the Amud Bet, the first picture. You'll see Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Issachar, Zevulun, Yosef, Benjamin. What if he only drew every other one? So you see Reuben, he wrote Kana, and you're acquiring it. Shimon lo Kana. Levi Kana, you did lo Kana, etc., etc. Maybe, do you only acquire those portions, every other half triangle you'll get, or not? when we get at the whole thing, all these cases we asked, we don't have an answer. Okay. If the guy made the three boundaries, he didn't write the fourth boundary at all. All right, this is a new case. He acquires everything except for the land by the fourth boundary. He obviously wanted to keep that part. Which Shmuel Mashma says, no, I feel he acquires the fourth one. Just because he skipped out, does not mean he didn't need to sell it. He just didn't need to draw it. Ravasi says, he acquires the fact that this is big as Hidush. Even though he drew three boundaries, but the fact that he didn't draw the fourth means he only wanted you to acquire the minimum on the entire field, the minimum small strip of land. Big Hidush. Because he holds a Rav who holds that once you leave out some, you're obviously leaving out most of it. Since he left out the fourth boundary, he's retaining the entire field. Okay, Maraba. The halacha is that if the buyer acquires everything except for the fourth boundary strip, like Rav said, that only applies when the fourth strip, the boundary in the fourth strip, was not included inside the boundary of the other sides. But if it is included, you do acquire. The word muvla is it means swallowed in. So if you look at the pictures, you'll see our last two pictures of that, I believe. You'll see the left side is lo muvla. The boundaries of the field that he drew did not include that fourth strip of land, the strip on the fourth boundary. And muvla means swallowed in, means it is inside the boundaries. So if it's inside the boundary, you acquire it. If it's outside the boundary, you don't acquire it because he obviously was trying to stick it out. Another addition on this halacha, even if it's not contained, you don't acquire it. There has to be a significant amount of property on it. So there either has to be palms on it, palm trees on it, or it has to be big enough to plant 9 kabim of seed, which you mentioned previously that's a hashivut, that makes it significant by itself, like its own field. But even if it's outside the boundaries, but it doesn't have enough of the palm trees or enough of the property of 9 kav seed to be planted there, then it is included because it's not hashuv enough to be excluded. Now the Gemara says we're going to make a diuk, or we're going to invert. Sounds like that if it is contained, even if there is palm trees or 9 kabin, you still are konet because it's already included. Okay, a different version. Marava, the halacha is that you acquire everything, even the fourth boundary. It only applies when it is contained. It's not contained, you don't acquire it. And now the second halacha, when you say that it's included, we don't say that you acquire it. There's no trees and there's no 9 kav minimum. But if there is that minimum amount, you don't acquire it. So the inference over here is that if it's not inside, even if it's outside and does not have that minimum amount of property, you still are not koneh. So now what's the two differences what are the differences between the two versions? We learned from both versions of Rava's halacha. I'm not sure which one it is, but definitely regarding to the actual field beside the fourth boundary of two different versions, but everything else, obviously the guy's buying it against Rav Asi, who said you don't buy it. We also learn when it's included, when it's swallowed up inside the field, inside the boundaries, when it's not no minimum, everybody agrees you acquire it. But if it's not swallowed up, and it has that minimum, everybody agrees that you do not acquire it because it is significant. Let's say you have, this is the two cases where the two versions contradict. If the strip is inside, but there has that palms or minimum field, or if it's not inside and it doesn't have, itmar la lahagisa, the halacha was mentioned both ways, the first way and second way, Ravaz's versions, and therefore, what do? Should the Dayani, the judges of the Beit Din in that case, should use their discretion and decide whatever they feel. Okay. Two machloket coming up. The first case is where the guy who's selling the field owns half the field. And what does he say, Maraba? Palga di itli bara palga. If this guy is selling his field, he only owns half the field. And he says in the sale, half of what I own in the land. Palga, the guy who's selling to, acquires the entire 50% of this guy's ownership. Palga be'arad the Italy, if he says half in the land that I own, Riva, he's obviously selling half of what he owns, which is half of the field. So therefore, if you're selling half, you're only selling a quarter. Mara doesn't like that. What's the difference between the two expressions? Half in the half in the land. They're both, you're obviously trying to sell all 50% that you own. Ishtik, Rabbi didn't answer him. I said, oh, I'm not starting to initially, I thought that Rabbi, because he was quiet, it seems like he agreed with me that that there shouldn't be no difference and the guy should acquire both. But the law is not true. Hazina the Hanus showed him nothing about I saw the halacha that you actually gave a psak on a certain case. And he actually wrote the halacha is that if he wrote if the guy did the first version, half of what I own, you get all 50%. And if you wrote half of in the land that I own, you get only 25%. So Rabbah just didn't answer him, but he didn't change the halakha. Second case, mahlogit, is where the guy is selling half of the field, a portion of the field, but doesn't, he owns the whole field, selling a portion, doesn't mention how much he's selling. But maravav, if the guy is selling, the boundary is the land is divided, halga, he's selling 50%, even though he didn't specify, but divide is a expression used for half. If you say a boundary from the land is being cut off, we only know the minimum amount. Tet kabin, 9 kav of seed property is being sold because that's the minimum of the significance of the minimum field. I ask him a question. Who cares what's the difference? Is divided or cut off? It should be half. Ishtik Rabbah didn't answer. Similarly, maybe they initially thought that maybe Rabbah would now agree that it's 50%. Wallahi, that's not true. He did not retract. Abaye himself explained to me Ben Mesar Amina the Palga or Ben Mesar the Arad whether or not he wrote divided or cut off. Palga. If the seller mentioned these are the boundaries, you get half. Lo amar if you did not mention the boundaries, automatically you get the minimum of a field of the 9 kavin, and that is the minimum. So seemingly like a in between Rabban and Abaye.